Good evening. Thank you all for joining our webinar tonight, and we're featuring Grazing Management by Casey.
All right, everybody, are you seeing? Well, let me get in the presentation mode. There we go. Everybody seeing that all right?
Yes, we see it.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Casey Spackman. I am the Extension Range Management Specialist for New Mexico State University. I'm glad that I was invited to share this presentation with you on rangeland grazing management. So I'm just going to dive right into it for you guys. So the first thing, kind of a asterisk of what to get out of the presentation tonight. So I want to emphasize each of your operations is different, and so it would take a one-on-one consult to address specific questions and things that apply to your operations. So no single management strategy fits all. I want to emphasize that. It's your land, your objective, and therefore it is your decision on what goes on your rangelands and your grazing management plan. So what I'm here tonight to do is just to provide you with some basic concepts of rangeland management to help you in your grazing strategies. Also, I'm an extension rangeland management specialist, but I'm not you are the specialist, I should say. We learn together. I'm a specialist in education of rangeland concepts, but you are the specialist on the ground. You know your land, exactly what it is and what needs to be done in a proper grazing management strategy. So what is rangeland management? So there's quite a few definitions on this aspect. The one definition that's used a lot is the manipulation of rangeland components to obtain optimal combination of goods and services for society on a sustained basis. So that's quite a mouthful. So what I've done is I've simplified it, right? So rangeland management is actually just use of rangeland components in a sustainable manner. So what are components? Well, you've got the vegetation, right? That's what's going to feed your livestock, the grasses. There's other things, the lumber industry. So trees are a big component, or in contrast, the brush component, which is becoming an increasing problem, and we need to remove those to increase our forage availability. We also have the soils, which is a component. So we have minerals, the oil and gas industry. We extract those resources. Those are goods and services for us. And then, of course, we have the water resources, which are critical for livestock. So those are some of your basic components. There's probably many more I've missed, but that applies to grazing management. How about sustainability? That's kind of a touchy word because we hear it a lot, right? Sustainability is actually a very subjective word because what you deem as sustainable does not necessarily mean a sustainable approach to someone else. So it's this broad scope, this broad word. So when I say that, it depends on your management plan, your time commitment on two things. So we have use, and then we have the resource conditions of the rangelands. Those all influence your bottom line. What's your bottom line? Your profits. You've got to stay in business. You've got to put food on the table. If we don't have profits, then there's no need to be in it. It's just a recreational hobby, right? So when we say sustainability, we have this window that these two the use and the resource conditions cross, and it's variable depending on the environment. But right in the middle, you want to optimize your profits, but also have sustained use to make those profits, and also have the resource conditions sustained so that you have a future business. Because if we use all the resources and maximize our profits to the extent that those conditions go down, then we're going backwards. We're not going to have something for the future. So that's where your time comes into that definition of range management. So this little note here, the key to successful rangeland grazing management is balancing use, as I talked about, with available resources for future and continued use. So I underline that word successful because, once again, I'm using a subjective term. I'm using success. How do you define success? So this is where I get into the numbers. If you are to know what sustainability is, you know what success is, you have to quantify, you have to put numbers to those words. So again, success is a subjective word without measurement. So my question to you is, how do you measure successful rangeland management? How are you balancing use with those resource conditions that are out there? I'm not expecting you to unmute and give me an answer. I just want you to think about that for a minute. How are you measuring successful rangeland management? And this is where I dive into some of those basic concepts to help you out. The key word there is measure. How do we measure rangeland conditions? How do we measure use? It comes down to one thing: monitoring. How many of you are going out there and monitoring your resources? I guarantee all of you are, in one way or another. You don't even think about it when you're measuring stuff. So monitoring entails a few things, and this is that list that I've got there. That is what I'm going to go through when it comes to monitoring. So before I get into that concept of you're already doing it, even if you don't think you are, you're already doing it, that ocular estimate. Before I get into that, I want to go over what it takes to monitor. So the first thing is timing. When do we monitor? When is the optimal time to monitor your rangelands, your grazing systems? Again, every area is unique. So we up in the north, we have a bimodal system. So you've got a mix of cool season, warm seasons. Down here in Cruces, we primarily have warm season grasses. 95% of our grasses are warm season grasses. So when do we monitor? Well, we monitor August, September at the tail end of the warm season grasses. However, if you've got cool season grasses in there, you've got to adjust a little bit. You may be monitoring 2 times a year. Right after that first peak hits with your spring grasses and they start drying out, and again in the fall after that summer slump is what they call it. So in November is when you monitor. If you've got a mix, you could be monitoring 3 times a year. Now that's just to get the annual assessment. You've got to take into consideration your unique environment. So you've got elevation that plays a role in there. We talked about cool season, warm season grasses. So your forage types, Terrain slopes will influence that. Your precipitation regime, that also heavily influences production. If you've got late season rains, you're going to have a different forage growth than, say, somebody who has early season rains. So in general, you've got to adapt to what your targeted forage is, when it reaches maturity, and when the optimal time is to take those measurements. So the next thing, where do you monitor? So some basic guidelines, and these are subjective to you, because sometimes we can't meet these specific guidelines. So greater than 1/4 mile from water, less than 15% slope, and areas greater than 5 acres. So the key thing here is with those things in scope, you want to select a site to monitor that is representative of your management objective, or in other words, representative of the pasture conditions. So we don't want to go down into measure just a riparian area that encompasses 5% of your pasture, because that's not going to tell what the other 95% are doing, what your other vegetation's doing, which is going to influence how much you use with your grazing management strategy. So whatever's representative of your pasture as a whole. So yeah, it may be worthwhile to go down and measure that 5% and know that that 5% represents a small portion of your pasture, but you also want to encompass the other 95%. Here's where I get into this. Did you know you've been monitoring? If you run livestock, if you pay attention to your vegetation, you're already monitoring. It's what they call ocular estimation. However, there's also this word up here that is variability. There's high variability in ocular estimation. My view of what's happening on the landscape is going to be completely different than what you see on the landscape. In all honesty, I would trust your ocular estimates over mine, because I am not familiar with that landscape. I'm not out there on the ground with the livestock. I'm not developing a grazing management plan. I don't have a history of how that landscape performs. So for me, it's just a one-off deal. You as producers are very good because you're there, you're on the ground, you've seen the historical trends. And so your variability is going to be much smaller than mine. So here's some interesting facts about variability. It's really easy to do an ocular estimation when you've got lots of vegetation on the ground. As soon as you start grazing that off, your variability starts increasing. So you're getting to that point where maybe you're right, maybe you're not right. Let's see. I'm going to pause there for a minute. Sorry, Mikhail, I didn't see your chat. Display settings. There we go. All right, is that better?
That's better.
Okay, thank you. I knew that was going to happen. I talked to her before I started this, that was going to happen, because I'm on two screens, so sometimes that happens. So yeah, so when you do your ocular estimates, it's really easy at the peak of the season when you haven't removed much forage, but as the season goes on and you start getting increased use, that variability of ocular estimation drastically increases. So one thing that constantly hits the state is drought, right? We're all aware of drought and we're all dealing with it. This is where ocular estimation is highly variable because drought decreases the production. And so we have that increased variability. So keep that in mind when you're doing your ocular estimation. That plus or minus symbol, right? Give yourself some wiggle room when you're doing ocular estimation. It's an approximation. It's not exact. So to give you an example, I use this diagram quite a bit that I came up with. So on the top, we have vegetation. On the bottom, we have our grazing management strategy. Your vegetation is either in an increasing state or a decreasing state. And you're either undergrazing or you're overgrazing. If you get it just right within that sweet spot, you're perfect. However, how do you know? How do you reduce the stress of knowing that you're within that sweet spot with ocular estimates? How close are you to needing to move your cows, or can you get a few more days out of that pasture? How do you know? So this is the diagram for ocular estimate variability. So you may be above that vegetation sweet spot, or you may be below. So when we monitor, this is where numerical monitoring comes in. How many of you can remember what you ate a year ago today for breakfast? Giving that as an example. I can't. I think I know, because I had pretty much the same diet, but am I really true to that? Did I eat yogurt? Did I eat cereal? Did I eat a granola bar? I don't know. I know it's somewhere in there. So that's where these photo points come in. Photo points give you a point in time record of your ocular estimates. What does it take to take a photo point? Well, you need some sort of reference, right? So you want to take one of the ground and one of the landscape. When you take a photo of the ground, you want a ruler. What does that ruler do? It gives you scale. How big are your plants? It doesn't have to be a ruler. If you put your boot in the picture, we know how big your boot is. If you've got a phone, you can put the phone on the ground, but you're generally taking a picture with your phone, right? Anything to just give you a little bit of scale. Also, where is that photo being taken? You want some sort of whiteboard to indicate what it is. So in these pictures, you can see I've got a ranch, I've got a date, I've got the pasture name, and then if you're doing measurements, multiple measurements within that pasture, you want to say measurement 1 or transect 1 or some sort of indicator, so you can repeat that. So you can take it back, that picture back to the same spot every year, and take another picture, compare them side by side, and say, are we in better condition? Are we in worse condition? So I think I covered this all right already. So visual estimates are a range of conditions over time. So that variability, right? So you have a range, a plus or minus. Photos captured at that point of time and give you more of an exact note of what's going on in your range. So that's why we take photos. I say this, if you're out monitoring and the only time you have is to snap a photo, that's the best monitoring you can bring home. Snap one every single year. Same area, approximately same time, and it'll tell you more about what's going on in your land than taking a bunch of data. So if you can only do one thing, this is the thing that I suggest you do for your monitoring, is take photos and keep those photos in a safe place for a reference. So that's ocular stuff. So let's dive into the numerical. What does numerical data do for you? It supports your management decisions for one, but it also supports your non-numerical data, so those ocular estimates. Why do I say this? If somebody comes and asks you why you are making a management decision, they may have a different opinion for you. But how do you translate what you your ideas in your head into something that other people can comprehend? How do you translate your ideas into a language that other people can understand? And that's where the numerical data comes in, some sort of commonality. Everybody knows what numbers are and percents, and so they can visualize what you're thinking better, your thought process on your grazing management. That's why I say numerical data is critical to support your non-numerical data, your photo points. So numerical data. Number two, if you've got time for one other thing on your monitoring protocols, just one other thing, this is what I suggest you do. It's not fun, but it tells you a ton about what's going on, specifically in a grazing management strategy. So your vegetation amounts, we also call this biomass or forage availability. So what you do with this is you have some sort of, they use squares, they use circles. We like using these hoops, these cable hoops, because you can fold them up really easy, stick them in your back pocket, and they're not those heavy steel square things that you got to pack around all day. But you know the size of that. So if you clip everything within that area, it's easy to go ahead and convert that into something like pounds per acre. You can see in that slide, range hoop and square conversions and dimensions. Whatever you're measuring, it's easy. So if you weigh the dry forage, so you clip it, put it in bags, obviously label your bags so you know where it came from. You dry that, and then you weigh it in grams. Then this table is really easy because, for instance, that hoop you're seeing, all I have to do is take the grams of forage that was in that bag and times it by 100, because that hoop has a specific dimension. If you go bigger, so if you double that hoop size, you times it by 50 and it gives you pounds per acre. So it gives you an overall estimate. I will say this, if you measure one is not good enough. I would love to estimate your whole pasture off of just one clipping, but every clipping is going to be different. And so a minimum of 3. Why a minimum of 3? Because it gives you that variability, that plus or minus that I was talking about with ocular estimates. So if you take a minimum of 3 clippings, you average those clippings, you can get a plus or minus of the variability on your land. So for instance, if you're calculating stocking rates, you can say, well, it has a variability of about 100 pounds per acre. So do I really want to push that upper limit, or do I want to go with the lower limit and leave some reserve forage there for my livestock, just in case the next year we don't get the rain and we need some of that reserve forage to get us by during a drought. However, this is often confusing to folks. There's 2 types of biomass estimates that you take. It may be self-explanatory to some. You have annual production, And then you have current production or residual production or seasonal production. They're interchangeable. We like to use residual because it gives a good idea. The word residual gives an indicator that, hey, it's what's left over from what the livestock have come in and consumed. So you'll see with annual production, you've got to have some way to keep your livestock away from that forage or anything else. Big thing, even keeping wildlife off from it. Big issue with elk that I won't go into. But yeah, so you set up these cages that excludes all grazing, and that way you can estimate your yearly potential. When do you estimate yearly potential? It's at the end of the year, so the end of the growing season. So if you've got warm season grasses, you're looking at the end of August through September, something like that, or before the snow flies. Whereas residual production, you can take any time of year to give you an estimate of how many pounds of forage you have left for your livestock. So the reason I bring up these two, we hear a lot, utilization. It's an overused term. Utilization is often used by agency personnel to make management decisions, but that's not what it was intended for. But to get utilization, it's simply subtracting your annual production from that residual production, and it gives you a percent. Pretty simple calculation. The issue with utilization, if you're estimating annual production, when do you do it? The end of the year. So when can you estimate utilization? The end of the year. If the beginning of the year, you're trying to decide what your stocking rate is based off of utilization, you don't really have annual production for that year yet. So how can you estimate that? Well, in order to use utilization, you need to have trends. So the literature states that you should have somewhere between 5 to 10 years of data to create a baseline to estimate stocking rates, because that gives you the ups and downs of forage production. So you get that median line going right through the middle of it, saying, well, we could have a bad year, but historically, if we stock at this number, this is what it's going to produce. And residual production is where you go in and estimate, oh, okay, we're hurting this year for forage. We're in a drought. Okay, let's adjust those stocking rates a little bit from our baseline. Maybe we'll run a little lower. Maybe you have a good year and say, hey, we've got above average, so let's run a couple more cows, make a little bit more bottom line, but be able to still reserve that resource for future use. So utilization. It can be used for short-term assessments and management changes, but should not be used as a sole source in management planning. So it's a tool in a toolbox. That's how I like to put it. There's other things that should be considered besides just utilization. And I'll go through a couple of those here in a minute. Utilization is highly dependent upon stocking rate, timing, distribution, and forage type. How many of you have heard of the acronym TID? TID is critical for grazing management. That means timing, intensity, distribution, and duration. So timing, intensity, distribution, and duration. So they all play into a management strategy. I say relative estimate of use here, just because I talked about that previously. I won't go into it, but yeah, it's relative because you don't have that year's annual production. That's why you need 5 to 10 years of production to get that baseline. Okay, well, we make monitoring easy for producers to a degree. So I talked about the minimum in monitoring. At least take photo points. If you can do a little bit more, take biomass production. If you want to build upon that, I would suggest using this methodology. The Rapid Assessment Methodology, or RAM for short, was developed for producers like you. A lot of agencies will use other methodologies, but they are very, very time consuming and measure things for an ecological purpose, but not for the bottom line of grazing management. This one measures the bare minimum and tries to make it quick and easy for you to save you time, because we know you are busy. You have 100 other things that you need to be doing. So spending a little time with the RAM stuff will help out, because it doesn't take that much time. Once you get the methodology down, it takes about 30 minutes to run a monitoring transect. And we have this available for you. So if you want things like what's in a monitoring kit, or the procedures for RAM, let me know. You need data sheets, just send me an email, and I will be happy to distribute those things to you. So how do we do it? Step point transect. Other methodologies use a tape. If you've ever used tape transects, measuring tape transects, they are tedious. You got to roll it out, then you got to walk back to the start, and then you go down and take all your measurements, and then you come back and you have to roll that tape up. And if you're doing a lot of transects, you'll get tired and you'll run out of time fast. So it's a big time sink for you. So that's why we use a step point transect. You don't need any extra tools. You walk it out. So about every second step, not about, every second step, the tip of the boot, you can see the line on my boot there, you take a measurement and you go out. With RAM, there's 100 measurements. So 200 steps, each pace is about 5 feet. So you're going out about 500 feet. So some people may have shorter steps and only go 400. Others have a longer stride, and so that may be 650 feet that you're measuring in a line. So another thing, ground cover. So ground cover at the tip of your boot, all you do is measure, well, hey, is there vegetation at the tip of my boot? Is there bare ground at the tip of my boot? Is there rock? Is there litter? Those are the very basics. If there's something else that you want to measure, make up a letter for it and put it in there, as long as it fits your needs of what your objective is and what you want to be measuring. So this, when you run the 100, it's easy because it's 100 measurements. Easy to make percentages when you've got 100 points. So you can get percent vegetation, percent bare ground, rock, and litter. But the real thing is, what does it tell you? What does ground cover tell you, and why should you be measuring it? Well, ground cover is used to determine soil stability and potential erosion. So the more vegetation you have, your erosion potential decreases. The more bare ground you have, your erosion potential increases. Whether that erosion is from water, whether that erosion is from wind, it doesn't matter. It's an indicator of erosion. There's some big terminology coming around. That's a big buzzword right now. Carbon sequestration, right? It's coming down the line. We may, as producers, be able to get carbon credits for promoting carbon sequestration, putting carbon from the atmosphere back into the soil. Well, guess what that is? That is soil organic matter. So it's the breakdown of plants that's stored in the soil. So increased litter not only prevents erosion, but it's also putting organic matter and nutrients back into the soil for future plants. So it helps the mineralization of the soil, so you have healthy, more vigorous plants. Bottom line of ground cover, the more vegetation you have, the better off you are. Your soil is going to be healthier, your plants are going to be healthier. But there is, going back to that other graph that I showed you right at the beginning, there's that careful balance of sustainability. So we don't want to overuse just for profits and deplete the resource that is there. So there's that sustainability window. Composition. So how well do you know your plant species? Well, you should. In a grazing management strategy, you should know what plants are there, because what plants are there will determine your bottom line as far as supplementation. For instance, if you have a field of Threon, so Aristida species, that's a pretty poor forage source. They really don't like the Threon species. It's still a source of forage, but you want other things. I mean, everybody wants blue grama and black grama, hairy grama, all the grama grasses, really, really high in protein. So it helps your bottom line in daily increases in your cattle gains. So we need to know what species are out there on the ground, and that's we provide this composition table on the back of our monitoring sheets just for that. However, if you don't know what they are, that's fine. When you're monitoring, write something down that you can identify with. That light green tall grass, LGTG, something that you personally can relate to, because these are your records. We can go in later and we can say, okay, that grass you're talking about, that's this one. It's just important to get species composition down. Now, addressing composition, what does it do for you? Why would we ever count species composition? I talked about that. Some species are more palatable to livestock, going to increase your bottom line as far as average daily gains. Some species are more tolerant to drought. So that terminology, I really don't like using these words because it is one of those subjective words, but your rangeland health. I like to substitute health with rangeland conditions. What are your rangeland conditions doing? Are your conditions increasing and being more desirable, or are they decreasing? So some species can be an indicator of what the condition of your rangeland is. For instance, so-called healthy rangelands are going to likely have a higher percentage of things like blue grama. Heavily grazed species are going to go more towards your Threon species, because they are more tolerant to grazing pressure. If not, they just aren't being consumed because livestock prefer other things. So it's species composition is an indicator of rangeland conditions. That's one of the reasons you want to take that measurement. Stubble height. Why would you want to even consider taking the height of your plants in your pasture? You're taking utilization estimates, that residual production. So why take stubble heights? Well, when you're running a transect and you hit a grass, you want to measure that as a vegetation hit. But if you don't hit anything, if you're hitting bare ground, litter, or rocks, you want to take the closest grass. So you're encompassing your whole pasture. And what you do is you're not measuring to the top of the plant, because what do livestock want to consume? They want to consume the leaves. That's where all your nutrient value is. So if you got a seed stalk, don't measure to the top of the seed stalk. Extend those leaves upwards along your measurement stick and record that in inches. So I talked about not to use utilization as the sole tool. This is another way, a little bit more time-consuming way to estimate extent of use. Grazed versus ungrazed plants. Also, excuse me, throat's getting raspy. Also, plants have a threshold of survivability when it comes to grazing. We call those growing points. If your livestock consume those growing points, they have nowhere to grow from. And so what a minimum stubble height does is it prevents you from going into those growing points, so you know for certain that you're not damaging those plants. So besides use, grazed versus ungrazed species, you also have a threshold of survivability. So I know that's a lot to do. Again, bare minimum, pictures. The next thing, if you have time, is to do the weigh and clip method and get some available forage, some biomass samples. All this other stuff depends on your time, and we leave it up to you. But if you do take all of this information, what's your time commitment? So initially, when you start out doing these transects, it's going to take you a little bit to get the methodology down. So you're looking at an hour and a half to do one transect. But once you get it down, it's only going to take you 30, 45 minutes to collect all of this information. Once you get that information, what do you do with it? We're trying to make this easy for you as well. We've got a program that we're trying to get up online for you to access and put your data into. It's called the Rangeland Data Assessment and Records Program. It's called RADAR. It automatically takes the information that you've recorded on your data sheet and puts it into a report for you, summarizing all of these things that I talked about. So you can easily look at it and say, oh, okay, this is the trend line that's going on in our pastures, or this is the species composition that we have. This is the percent of available forage we have. How much does it cost? Well, your initial cost is going to be in your monitoring kit. And then cost following that is going to be your time. So what's your time commitment for that? So plan to spend anywhere from $50 to $450 per monitoring kit. You don't have to make them fancy. For instance, what I use for my whiteboard, you don't need to go to a fancy store and buy a proper whiteboard that you can erase. If you got a piece of paper and a clipboard, that's all it takes. Just write on it and then flip it over for your next one and write on that. Your GPS units are going to be an expensive investment. They range anywhere from $200 to $600. Also, your scales, the ones we use, my personal kit uses a Pasola scale, which is about $75. You can get digital scales from a store for as cheap as $20. So it doesn't need to be fancy. So in total, you're looking at anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes per transect. Ignore that 90-minute. That's a typo. That was supposed to be 60 minutes, and roughly about $150 for a monitoring kit. I have to ask this. I ask this every time. How much does your yearly insurance policy cost? Is it $150? Because that's exactly what your monitoring is doing for you. It's an insurance policy. It helps you define your management objectives moving forward. It helps to manage your livestock better, gives you an idea of what you need to cull or keep in your herd. As far as vegetation availability, helps you plan for drought. Most importantly, it helps your mental health, because you're not worrying about am I meeting that sweet spot of vegetation versus use. I'll emphasize this though, no single monitoring method will give you an answer. You've got to use them all. So all the different aspects of that, the more you use, the more time commitment you put into it, the better the picture is going to turn out for your grazing management strategy. Also, multiple years are going to give you a better picture. So as time goes on, you start developing trends, and the picture is going to become more and more clear and much easier to decipher what it is. So again, going back to this model of sustainability, use versus resource conditions. We've got to hit that sustainability window. What that sustainability window is will depend on you. As far as monitoring, start small. Start with 2 of those things minimum. So take photos and take some clippings, and then build upon that depending on your time constraints. That'll help you in your grazing management strategies. And I believe that's it for my slides. So I will take questions or move to a slide if I move through that pretty quick, but I'll move to a slide if you have more questions on that. So feel free to unmute your mic or go ahead and throw your questions in the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer those. Mario, you had a question.
Casey?
Yes, Marjorie, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. I always wondered the measurement of the pasture using that range cage. We used to do 100 feet every 4 direction and twice a year. And we were doing grazed and ungrazed. And then, like you said, was it a bare ground, or there's a rock or something like that. So at the end of we used the form, and I did not know how to calculate that utilization, like how much was used. So I'm still kind of puzzled on that. Maybe
Okay.
more session in that area would be very helpful. But you did bring up a lot of information this evening, and I was just thinking about, like, okay, I'm doing this, and then I was doing the photo points too, and I do compare them, like year 1 and year 2. There is a lot of differences, and it's very helpful. So that's all I wanted to ask, the utilization portion. And I'm still like not clear on that, but one of these days I guess I'll get it.
No,
Thanks.
you're just fine. So I talked about I'm biased towards the RAM methods. Why am I biased? Because they're so quick and simple. They're made for producers like you. We start getting into the agency methods, the one you were talking about, the cross methodology, where you go out in 4 directions. That's fine to use.
Yes.
That's fine. As far as utilization based off of grazed and ungrazed plants. So
Yes.
That comes from the NRCS and their forage conversion table that they've got. So it comes down to height, species, and number of plants grazed or ungrazed. And they make this what they call a utilization dial, to where you take those numbers and you line up the different dials on this thing, and then it'll give you a percent utilization. That is, it's pretty complicated. I'm a pretty straightforward person. I like using cages instead. But if you do decide to use that, it's fine. Just know its limitations with that. What's that? What that is based off from is a prediction that that plant produces so much forage in a growing season, which there's a lot of restrictions. What happens if the animals go ahead and just graze the bottom and leave the top, and we're measuring the top? That's an example of something that could skew the data on that. But that's where that utilization calculations come in versus on grazed and ungrazed. And yeah, so that would be something to get with the NRCS on, and request one of those wheels if you decide to go forward on that type of methodology. And they have those wheels for you.
Thank you, Casey.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marge, for that good question. If there's any other questions, please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can go ahead and type your question in the chat box.
So Mario, I saw that you had your hand up a minute ago. Was that a question, or just hit the wrong button?
Can you hear me right now?
There we go. Now you're unmuted.
Okay. No, no, I think I covered everything. I wrote all the notes here for the. I was just trying to, when you say utilization, it was they use it in the agency. Just use it for making the decisions of if you move if you have that for the stocking rate. It's subtracting, and I don't remember what you said about subtracting utilization.
Yeah,
so it, but
yeah, so the term they use for that is called a paired plot, and what that means is they're taking clippings within the cage, so an exclusion cage, and from outside the cage, and subtracting the two. So they subtract what's outside the cage from what's inside the cage, and gives you a utilization number.
Okay. I think you covered everything very good. It's more practical what you said. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We have time for a few more questions.
Hi, Casey. I have a question. As far as the NRCS web soil survey, you go on there and it tells you what your potential in the area, the grass production. How often is that updated? Is that updated yearly, or every 10 years, or do you know how that works?
I do. I know that very well. And again, there are a lot of predictions. So the Jornada, so we're talking about ecological site descriptions. So when you talk about soil surveys, that's what we're targeting. So depending on the ecological site will depend on what the production is. However, they're predictions. Unless they have validated that from coming up, whether the NRC does it, or somebody from the USDA comes up and takes soil samples and verifies that, I would not trust the ESD. That's something that you've got to look into to make sure that the site is validated according to what is being put up on the soil survey site. So a lot of, that's where site selection comes in. A lot of agencies will go ahead and select the site based off of those ESDs. That's why you heard me say representation, right? You want it to represent your pasture. I don't go off of what the soil survey says as far as monitoring and selecting a site. I go off of what the producer says is representative of that pasture. I think that's a more accurate prediction of what's going on than basing it off from a predictive model of soil surveys. Not taking away from it, because there are areas that have been substantially validated time and time again of what so it validates what the soil is saying, what can grow there. As far as how often they're updated, I believe they update them as validation comes in. So again, you'll have to look or contact NRCS to see when the last time that particular soil survey was updated. And make sure that when you ask that, ask if it has been validated.
Okay, thank you. And then another question with those transects, you're talking about location. Of course, you don't want to put it down at the bottom of the meadow where water sits. Of course, you're going to get high readings. And then also, on top of a hill, because I've seen producers do that, but the grasses don't grow as tall as in other places. And does the location on top of the hill where the wind is hitting it make does that, make a difference in how high the plant grows, the grasses grows?
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't say it has a lot to do with the wind, though that does have an impact. I would say that is more on the moisture end of it. If you're taking it from on top of the hill, water is going to run downhill and it's draining all of that water off. And that's why your plants are going to be shorter on top of the hill and taller in the bottom drainages. As far as site selection and running your transect, if you've got that kind of variability, using your best judgment, I would run from the top of the hill down off the edge and a little bit into the riparian. So what that tells you is you're accounting for several parameters within your pasture. You're taking in the low vegetative production on top. You're taking in the intermediate as you go down the side of the hill, and you're also taking in some of that riparian. By doing that, it saves you from running 3 transects, because if you didn't run it off that hill, you'd have to take one on top of the hill, one on the slope, and then also one down in the bottom where the water settles. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. But it is subjective. So it's up to you on what you think is going to be the best representation. So always keep that in mind. Whatever best represents your pasture is where the whole pasture is what you want to target. Because if you put it in the bottom where it's high production, you're cheating yourself, and you're gonna run out of forage pretty early on those upper slopes. You're gonna hurt the land, and you're over time your profits are going to be gone. That graph that I showed. So.
Okay, thank you, Casey.
Casey, I have another question. This
Yes.
question normally always pops up. Uh, I work with my chapters, community people. Sometimes they do raise concerns about how long they should rest their land, just like the way we are here in Northwest. Um, the precipitation is very low, and some areas they're not overgrazed, but it's just like a rain that just kind of the growth is not there anymore. And some people would say, how long should I think I would rest this land? And then, but sometimes I just say, looks like it's going to be 2 years. You're going to have to hold off, until there's regrowth. Or if it rains all summer long, maybe next year. I don't know. That's sometimes people do question, like, what do you think? How long should I put my land to rest up and turn out my cattle back in? So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so it comes back to that acronym, right? TID. So we're in the duration aspect. How long can I graze? Well, there's a, or when, how long do we need to rest it, right? So it's actually on
Yes.
the opposite of that, the duration thing. Rest is subjective. Some plants thrive on disturbance, such as grazing. Some plants are better adapted to droughty situations. So I don't like the terminology complete removal of livestock as far as grazing. If you're concerned about it, graze on the lighter end. Never remove your cattle. Graze on the lighter end. What that means is you may have to reduce stocking rates slightly if you're concerned about it.
Yes. Yeah.
There's no clear answer to that.
Yeah.
There's lots of data out there that says, for every year of drought we need to give our grasses 2 years of rest, or when we graze it heavy, we need to give it 2 years of rest. Those kind of things. In reality, this is where the art and not the science comes into play. So I'm sorry I don't have a clear answer for you, but it would.
Yeah, I am like that too. I said, oh gosh, it looks like 2 years if we continue to have low precipitation, or if it rains all summer long, maybe next year. But you really need to get it some regrowth there before you turn out.
So this is So this is where the 5 to 10 years of data comes in handy, because you're going to see increases and decreases in the trajectory of your land conditions. And that's what I would base your stocking rates off from, rather than say rest. Adjusting your stocking rates based off from what the trajectory of your conditions are doing.
Okay, thank you, guys. Casey.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for such great questions. We'll go ahead and someone else have one last question. Go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can go ahead and type in the question in the chat box. If not, then we'll go ahead and proceed. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you, Casey, for that in-depth, informative presentation on grazing management. a lot of ways to measure and monitor rangeland vegetation. So a lot of good information that you indicated. So thank you for taking the time to present this presentation for us. So greatly appreciate it. So
Yes,
with that
you're
being-
welcome.
Yep, thank you. So with that being said, we are going to go ahead and close this out with our next webinar, which is going to be April 12th. We're going to be covering cattle supplementation. This is going to be presented by Craig Gifford, who's a CES beef specialist from NMSU. It is registered. You need to register for this event, so you can head on over to the NMBQA website. Right here is the website. Just go ahead and click on that, and it'll take you over to the registration page. So stay tuned. We are going to have this on April 12th from 5:30 all the way to 7 p.m. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and close this out. You all are going to receive a survey, so we would really appreciate if you guys take that survey. That really helps us a ton. But other than that, thank you all for attending this webinar tonight. Casey, thank you. And you all have a good evening. Just to kind of give you an overview of our project, the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project is a New Mexico Cooperative Extension Initiative delivered in collaboration with our project partners. One of them is the May College Land Grant Office, and COPE, which stands for Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. Our project is funded by the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Program. Okay, and just to give you an overview of what the Navajo Sustainable Project is and who we are, we help to improve the operations, profitability, and sustainability of socially disadvantaged Navajo farmers and ranchers and veteran farmers and ranchers. We also aim to increase Navajo knowledge in the use of USDA programs. This would be NRCS, FSA, RD, and RMA programs and services, and those other resource providers. And we also aim to increase the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy foods by Native family individuals.